Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Higher Ed Live. I am your host, Franz Blocky, and I have a couple awesome guests with me this evening. Before I get into introducing them, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about the topic I'm going to have tonight, and also to thank our sponsors. So, tonight's show is sponsored by Omni Update. Oh, I just lost my feed. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay. Omni Update is the leading web content management system CMS provider for higher education. The company's web CMS OU Campus is secure and scalable with great tools and features, deployment flexibility, and an awesome user community. Check out Omni Update's new case study with John Cabot-Rome on reliable international CMS support, and we are tweeting out a link to that case study right now. Higher Ed Live is also sponsored by Uversity, which formerly was called Integral. They are the creators of the Schools app. Join Uversity on October 8th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, for their upcoming webinar, Maximizing Enrollment with Social Media, to learn about best practices in admissions marketing. And we are tweeting out the link to that webinar now. Lastly, mStoner is presenting a 3-part web analytics series. You know the data that you're collecting is important, but how do you plan to use it? How do you put it to use? How do you align this data with institutional objectives? How do you take advantage of Google's advanced features like customized reporting, event clicks, or funnels? Well, you'll get answers to all those questions and more, and sharpen your knowledge of Google Analytics with mStoner's 3-part webinar series. So we're tweeting out a link now where you can learn more about the series and register. Institutions can also register for individual webinars or receive a discount by signing up for all 3 at once. All right, awesome. So I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves. And first on the guest list tonight is Meg Bernier. Meg, take it away.
Hey everybody, I'm Meg Bernier. I'm the Assistant Director of Editorial Services and Social Media at St. Lawrence University in upstate New York. And my job is to spend my days and nights talking with students and listening to the stories they have about St. Lawrence, and then finding the best ways to share them, not only in print publications, but on our website, and I also manage all of our social media.
Well, welcome, Meg. Thanks so much for being here. Next up is Mayan Plout. Mayan, welcome. Oh, I think you might be on mute.
I'm no longer muted, so now I can talk about
it was
myself.
The best sentence you've ever spoken in your whole life, I'm sure.
It was beautiful. I'm really sorry that nothing I will say tonight will compare. It's to the ether. My name is Mayan Plout. I'm the social media coordinator at Oberlin College. I manage all things that say Oberlin College on them, like our Facebook and our Twitter and our Tumblr and all that good stuff. I also manage our homegrown cool social media stuff like the Oberlin Blogs and the Oberlin Stories Project. And beyond all of that, I get to figure out all the cool ways that people at Oberlin can connect with each other. I serve as a strategist, cheerleader, and general troubleshooter for anyone on campus doing social anythings.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayan, for joining us tonight. Really looking forward to what you have to say. And lastly is Derek Duncan. Last but certainly not least. Derek, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. My name is Derek Duncan, a Senior Business Intelligence Analyst at the University of Denver here in the lovely Mile High City. So helping out the Central Marketing Communications Office as well as all kinds of departments across campus with fun, nerdy things like predictive modeling, data mining, and traditional marketing research. So thrilled to be here.
Awesome. This is going to be a really good conversation about, well, really it's about 2 different things, but how they relate to each other. The first is lifetime engagement management. And lifetime engagement management is really the life cycle model of engaging people on campus. It's the idea that your audience starts the first day you contact them when they're a prospective student, and they really remain your audience and change audience, but really remain in the same kind of relationship with you throughout their lives. And actually throughout more than just their lives, but the lives of family members who may go to the same school after you. So I've done a lot of talking and writing about lifetime engagement management, and I'm not going to go into all the detail on it tonight because I want to look at a particular perspective of it. But if you're interested in learning more, we're going to be sending out a tweet right now which has links to a couple of the blog posts that I've written and a webinar on this topic. The piece I want to talk about tonight is what the web staffer of the future looks like. In the context of lifetime engagement management. So if we're all working together and we break down all the silos and we have cohesion between enrollment and student affairs and alumni backed to enrollment, what does that look like for someone who's employed for an institution like that? What types of responsibilities would someone like that have? Where would they live within the organizational hierarchy? What types of trends in new graduates might have an effect on the way that we do things as they start to enter the higher education workforce. So that's the goal here. It's going to be an open-ended discussion. I think we're going to have a lot of really good ideas flowing back and forth. But I want to start things off just by talking about what a lifetime engagement model looks like on the ground. What's the organizational structure look like? What examples do we have of jobs that look like this? Or even if they're unofficial for my guests, what examples have they experienced personally or witnessed on their campuses or others? And I will start things off with Meg.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen a ton of it specifically on my campus. I know that in the communications role that I'm in, I'm housed in our communications/marketing office. And one of the things that I really try and do is when I work with people across campus, I try to be the blend between all of the offices. So I think that's something that someone who's focusing on lifetime engagement management needs to think about, the connections that they're making between all of the offices, and that they're sort of that linchpin to making those connections. So it's one of the philosophies that I keep in the back of my head when I'm doing the work that I'm doing, when I'm talking with students, when I'm talking with colleagues across campus, that this is ultimately what I'm hoping to do, is create this wonderful relationship our students and all members of our audience have with St. Lawrence. And I do that through the work that I do by enabling the people I work with to, I hope that they know that their opinions and what they're doing is really valued and how awesome they're doing it. And I think that that's one of the things that somebody in a role like this would need to do. They need to be somebody who, isn't someone that's telling you, you need to be doing this and you need to be doing that. They're really embracing the position and saying, we're doing this together. We're in this together. The word isn't coming to mind right now of exactly what I'm trying to say, but rather than being the most important person in the room, they're the ones that are saying, let's listen to this perspective, let's listen to that one, and kind of balancing it all out.
I'm translating what you're saying into someone who doesn't like to go on ego trips and be the biggest brain in the room at all times. That someone who's really willing to listen to other people before they offer their own ideas, and to kind of connect the dots between conversations they have with people all over campus. So a little bit of humility, I think, is a good quality for somebody who's going to be involved here. And I think optimism, too. Anyone who's going to be doing this is going to need to be a positive thinker and someone who can have a vision for how things can be, not get stuck with how things currently are. Because sometimes, and actually more often than not, things are pretty siloed. So cool. All right. So Maayan, any thoughts?
You said listening just now, and that's the first thing that pops to mind when I think about lifetime engagement in general, just as a concept, is that it's, right now I think the reason why we know that a lot of this exists is actually very reactionary. When a current student feels like that they're not connected to the alumni, because when they become an alumni it doesn't make sense anymore because it doesn't seem like you're talking to the same people. It starts getting very confusing because you feel like the same human and no one else is looking at you as that, not the development over time, which is way more important. So right now the way I see it happening in general is just us reacting to what's happening. And that's a great place to start, and I think I feel kind of lucky in that, being the social media person at Oberlin, I get to hear all these little random bits and pieces of people through the transition parts of it. So I manage our incoming student group. They turn into current students. Eventually they'll become alumni. We hope all of them become alumni. And that the only consistent person listening right now is myself, and only in the past year-ish have people around campus realized that there is this pool that we can start to connect with people at very different levels at very different times. So everyone's becoming a part of this bigger picture. Unfortunately, I'm the only one that's kind of in this position that her role is to do that. I think it's interesting that Meg and myself are both in like a central communication sort of position, which means we get to hear about a lot of things and hopefully we know where they all connect. So a lot of what I get to do right now is pointing people in the right direction. But once people get there, I don't know if they end up getting what they need or if they get pointed somewhere else. So it's all this giant network and web and, you know, just those words that we're using all the time for a lot of different things, but we're not. Yeah. I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought there at the end. We're thinking really big. That happens sometimes.
No, that's not a problem at all. As you were talking about that, I was thinking of how one of the aspects of a person who needs to either formally or informally be in charge of lifetime engagement management is that they really do need to be a matchmaker, right? Like you said, like bringing two people together. You might actually not know how it all works out in the end, but at least you've gotten them together for that initial conversation. Cool. All right. Well, Derek, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on this first question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was thinking of something that Mayan said about, you know, being in that central hub and pointing people a lot of different directions. And, you know, right now all we can do is cross our fingers and hope that where we've pointed them lands someplace good. So I think it's a really interesting conversation. And I know certainly for my institution, we expect the next couple of years to be a really big turning point in terms of how we evolve towards this model of considering the whole relationship with the person regardless of what life cycle stage they're at. And I think the more that people can, you know, come to that shared vision of what really putting value metrics on it, essentially, you know, beyond the ones that exist purely within a silo. You know, we know our enrollment bogeys, we know our student persistence bogeys, we know our alumni engagement and giving bogeys. You know, what's the metric that ties all of those together? What's the value language that we can all speak so that when we talk about this, we have a really good dialogue and we're not speaking these different languages. You know, I think getting people to play ball, there's absolutely the ego component that Meg was mentioning earlier. One of the other things that I notice a lot in higher education is desperation is probably too strong of a word, but you know, you're dealing with people. You're dealing with people who are working their butts off with absolutely no resources, and they're scraping by with whatever they can get done. And you know, when you get someone in survival mode, I think that's where the status quo becomes a very comfortable thing. And so allowing people the opportunity to bring their heads up for a second and realize that collaboration, I think will be really important. You know, and that starts from a top-down type of move in terms of empowering your employees to do that without working them into the ground and not giving them a moment to realize what's happening outside of their silo. So, you know, I know here, you know, we're trying to leverage our position in a central communications office with things like our university-wide brand, with our content and our public relations and communications, so that at least across life cycles, we're speaking the same language with these people. You know, we're communicating with one voice. How that plays out tactically with actual executions is, you know, still your traditional situation, but we hope it's moving in the right direction.
That's great to hear. And so, I mean, how much of a breakdown, this question's for everybody, do you think, how much of this is managing up and how much of it is top down? And what are some of the things that you personally do or think would work as far as managing this up into the organization, and what are some things that just simply cannot happen until it's embraced culturally from the top down?
Well, I think the way this actually gets started is not an up or down, but a cross. So I'm working with people similar to me across campus all the time, and it's made me realize that a lot of these silos exist, but we're making bridges between the silos, if you want to go down a giant metaphor path.
Sure.
That there's a lot of connections being made small scale that are helping change things big scale. So I don't know if that's top down or bottom up. I think the starting small thing is just talking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's grassroots, but also just like we identify a need and we make it happen. So that's I guess that's pretty grassroots. Yeah. So I know it's not a sustainable thing though, because you can only make so many connections between people, and people change and whatever else.
Yeah, I think the ability to do that, you know, is really valuable at building the case for this type of model. You know, getting small incremental wins, demonstrating some value, you know, sledgehammering a piece of the silo, if you will, to build that bridge. And hopefully you work towards a tipping point. And I think, you know, like you said, it's not sustainable, and what will make it so is really the organizational focus and the top-down accountability and value metrics that put this into place. You know, like I said, everyone's accountable for the things that are in their own individual silo, because that's what's being mandated from our boards and our presidents and chancellors and our deans, is to meet those specific metrics. And no one's really being held accountable for the lifetime metric, the lifetime value that we build of our constituents. And so once we start setting those organizational goals in that way, I think that top-down will kind of meet the middle, or the bottom-up approach that we're building in a grassroots way right now.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're all right on with that. I think that makes a lot of sense, that there will be it's almost the tipping point is a really good way of putting that you'll get to a point where momentum from so many small pockets will converge to a point where it just moves the entire entity in a different direction. So, all right. So, what kind of skills, as someone who works in higher education, let's assume for a second that all our dreams come true and we actually end up with a lifetime engagement model on every campus, and there's rainbows and unicorns and it's always sunny, just like it is, like it looks like it does behind Derek right now with all this nice natural lighting. And we have this, and we are working in this system. What kind of skills are going to be the most useful to succeed in a system like this? What types of, you know, qualities for higher education professionals are going to be paramount to be a leader in this type of area?
I think above all, being able to collaborate, but not just being able to share ideas with other people and listen, but actually finding value in them. You know, I think one of the things I've learned in my position as a social media coordinator is that I'm not the expert in everything, and even a person in a lifetime engagement management role, they might have, like for me, if I were in a role like that, my expertise would probably lie more so in the marketing and communications aspect. And so then trusting the people in the other offices that I'd be working with to be the expert in their field, and making sure that they bring that to the table, and really listening, and sort of not only listening to them, but then educating other people on campus about the importance of lifetime engagement.
Great. Derek or Mayan, anything to add to that?
I just agree completely. I think the best way that I can put it is that I know where my gaps are, but I know who fills in those gaps around campus. And that's a really useful way to think about the fact that like you mentioned earlier, what does a lifetime engagement person look like? I actually see it as all of us doing it, because it's part of the customer service model in my mind. But it's knowing what your strengths are and matching them with other people's strengths, so you end up with a pretty strong thing. So, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think not viewing the strengths that you may have and the gaps in others as a reason to put up a barrier between them. You know, I know, you know, speaking to systems and data and that type of thing, especially, you get a lot of that defensiveness because someone knows they understand it, you don't, so I need to keep you out of this sandbox and we can't play together. But having a better dialogue back and forth so that those walls can come down, and acknowledging, no, you're still the expert, you got it, but we need to talk to each other. I think the other really big thing, and of course I'm biased in saying this, but someone being a really good consumer of information and data is going to be critical. if you work with the same group year over year, you get into a little bit of a routine. It becomes easy to trust your intuition and your gut knowledge of how certain things go. When you start looking at a full life cycle, lifetime engagement model, adapting to the changes in that, adapting to the changes as technology progresses, you can't keep up with it just with what you know year after year. You have to be able to read the tea leaves that your constituents are going to tell you. They're going to indicate with their behaviors how they want to be engaged with. And so being able to identify those and go after, either with the right content or the right channels or the right frequency, the cadence, the constituents will tell you what they want. And so someone that's able to pick up on that and leverage it will be really important.
So
I feel like part of that, though, is also knowing how to ask the right question, because you can listen a lot, but sometimes there needs to be a specific question asked. Is this actually what makes sense here? Because otherwise it just feels like you're throwing things out there and hoping that they might work.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you have to have really clear objectives of wherever, the examples that I just gave. Are we looking at what channels we want to be in? What's working here with these different audiences? Having a clear objective of the place that you want to optimize. Is it content? Do we need to figure out how we adjust our content mix for alumni life cycle, current students, that type of thing? Yeah, going into it willy-nilly and just kind of saying, give me some information is a surefire way to waste a lot of time looking at information.
So what kind of information should be the most value to people looking at that? I mean, even if you've got an example of what type of information one area of campus owns that another area of campus could really benefit from, and vice versa. And I know I love the idea, Derek, of acknowledging someone's expertise off the bat to kind of ease them into the idea of collaboration, as opposed to demanding something without offering something in return. So it's kind of an expertise bartering system, if you will, where you have something to offer and so does somebody else, and combined you both have more value, but you need to trade off. So what kind of information do you think can be shared? What's of value in each of these various pieces? So within enrollment, what's of value? Within student affairs, what's of value? Within alumni, what's of value? And so, how can these areas work together to ultimately be, have more utility out of the data that's on campus? So specific examples, pick any of those scenarios.
Yeah, well, I'll acknowledge that I'm not an expert in some of the various areas like admissions specifically, but you got to believe that there's opportunities there when a student crosses that line at enrollment and becomes a current student. There's going to be predictors of persistence and student success that we identified in the admissions process. And making sure that flows through. There's going to be predictors of alumni engagement and donation that happened when they were a current student, their involvement and their activity on campus. And so we need to make sure that that carries through. An alumni could live right next door to a prospective student, and their parents are really great friends. Even if you don't get that legacy connection, there's still information there that could be really valuable. And so I think there's things that follow each other through all the way through the life cycle. But
cool.
I don't know if anyone else has thoughts.
I've got one idea, but anybody else have any data-related examples that they can think of?
Well, I can think of a data challenge in particular is that, as of now, granted, I'm in communications. I don't actually deal with a lot of the database stuff that we have. Kind of wish that we did. But the interesting thing to me is that it seems like none of our systems currently talk to each other. And I don't know if it's like we need a new system or we need them to connect to each other. But basically right now I think a lot of our hangups are we can't really go between each one of those individual ones without doing a lot of manual labor, and as a result we just aren't necessarily going to do it. So what we're doing is we're either repeating efforts or we're trying to build it from a lot of different things, or we're asking the same question over and over again. And that's dangerous because you can only ask so many questions. If you ask the same question multiple times, what's the point? I don't know. I think that is a data wish for me, is that things could speak to each other better so there can be more sharing between things. But I think that's a much bigger question than our campuses.
No, I share your data wish on that, and I'm glad you brought up the tools, because I think, being able to scrutinize really carefully the vendors that we work with in higher education against a lifetime engagement model is going to be really important, because right now you have a lot of companies out there that frankly have capitalized pretty well on the silos that exist in our organizations. They serve undergraduate admissions really well. They serve current students really well. They serve alumni really well. They serve the other aspects of that not at all. I spent most of my day today working on it. My current battle is just trying to pull out nuggets of information from these different systems. And we work with some pretty major email vendors in the industry, and it's impossible to get data out about what constituent level email data. Have they opened our emails? Are they clicking on our emails at a constituent level? And having that granular of information so that we can tie individuals together throughout their life cycle is going to be critical. I can't build an event stream of an individual person if the data is locked inside email systems X, Y, and Z. Same thing with social media, same thing with event management systems. I mean, the list goes on, and none of those have been built in a way that's conducive to centralizing the data.
I would argue that these silos that exist on campus are propagated across technology and are propagated even across professional development, although not as badly. I've said for a while that I think conferences that only student affairs professionals go to, where student affairs specific technology companies have been there for years and everybody knows, may know each other, are valuable for the people who work within student affairs. And I think that there is definite value in, specific content expert pieces of that. So there's things that aren't relevant to someone who doesn't work in student affairs. There's so much though that could be cross-pollinated, and I think that the model could, really apply to more than just an individual campus. It could apply to the way we approach our discussion forums in general. How do we, bring people from all over different campuses together to even have this discussion and become aware of it? How do we stop pushing the same silos through the same conferences that are specifically targeted? So, not knocking the conferences that are there, because I think they're valuable. I think there needs to be more than that. I think there need to be conferences with the goal of unifying these various areas and talking about topics from a multidisciplinary approach. So that's my soapbox, and I'd love to see that happen. And if it doesn't happen, or even if it does, I'm going to probably try to do one eventually, one of these days myself. We're going to create the unconference and we're going to have it. So mark my words. Today I said I was going to do it, so it's going to have to happen.
It's on live TV. It happens now.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. So let's talk. We want to talk too about what this is going to look like from an individual employee standpoint, and I think professional development is one of the areas that an individual employee would benefit from having this model. Let's think about good things that could happen for people who work within higher education. Let's imagine that we're there, we've arrived, we've got this type of model. What types of things are you able to do now that you couldn't do before?
I think we're going to be able to relationship build better than we ever imagined, because at this point, a lot of what we do is very segmented, and I have interacted with dozens of people at Oberlin over my time as a prospective student, current student, alumni, employee, whatever, and all of them are good, but not all of them have all of the pieces. So the person I met with this afternoon, I've interacted with twice over the last year, and she doesn't know my backstory, but it would be cool if she had a little bit more about me, so we could have had a even more intense conversation than the one that we had. So there was a lot of spontaneity, but having a little bit more background would have been even more valuable for each of us. So I say relationship building as like the big thing, that like Oberlin can have a better relationship with me, but actually what I mean is the people related to Oberlin can have a better relationship with me as a person, and I can have better relationships with them as people. but also as a whole, my relationship to Oberlin could get better.
I very much agree with what Mayan had to say. I think when I think about how much better relationships will get, I actually think about it in the form of authenticity. We talk about building relationships all the time with people and making them more personal and whatnot, and so obviously I think that would help that, but I don't think higher education does a very good job of having authentic relationships with alumni. There's always another goal. There's always, well, I'm making this call because at the end of the day I really need to, get a gift out of this person, or I need them to volunteer for this event, or whatever it is. And I think someone in this position would need to really educate people on how to break out of that mold and really become more excited about developing relationships like we have with our friends, things that aren't built on ulterior motives, but are more so about really connecting with them and, in essence, connecting them with the institution. I think that that's what lifetime engagement is supposed to really be all about.
I agree. I think it's tough to separate what's ultimately a business need from the desire to build real human relationships. But what I flatly throw out as an idea is that those are mutually exclusive things. There is no reason why you cannot justify why you need to improve the school or maintain the school or create new programming for students or just, in general, make the school a better place to learn, but also hurt relationships with people. Like, you should be able to build relationships that should be mutually positive. But I think that we oftentimes have a real disconnect. We look at what we need to do for our jobs perhaps as just what we need to do for our jobs, and not from the perspective of what we're, ultimately what we're trying to do for students and for the school. And so I think the lifetime engagement management model from an individual staffer's perspective is important, because it lets you kind of take a step back and say, okay, we're doing it for the kids, right? I mean, I know that's like the catchphrase, but like we're doing it because we're an institute of higher education, and we have a mission that is to educate and for people to improve themselves, and ultimately fundraising is there to make those systems better. It's not just fundraising for fundraising's sake. I think one of the things from a mechanical standpoint that makes it easier to have those more human conversations, believe it or not, and it's somewhat disingenuous, depending on how you approach it, is to have better data on the people you're going to talk to. The more you know about the person you're about to talk to, the more detail you have about what hooks they have with the university, what they really were passionate about, whether it was a particular academic program or a particular professor or a sports program or anything really, the more you're going to be able to connect with them. And it can be a genuine connection, and really, pairing alumni who have passion for the same thing as students is a real connection, as opposed to something that's completely manufactured. But we need the data to be there, and we need the connections between people throughout these phases of the life cycle in order for those kind of conversations to happen, and so we don't come across as just generic and flat and out of touch. So that, I think there's a way to meet the business goal, do a good job from a professional metric standpoint, and also build real human relationships. And I actually think you cannot be as successful as possible unless you're looking to do it that way.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I agree. I think I mentioned earlier, constituents will tell you exactly how they want to be engaged with. It's just a matter of if you have the data at hand and know how to use it to do that. I think, Fran, like you mentioned earlier, true engagement and relationship building is not exclusive of financial support and business outcomes in the long term. So it's what I need to do my job today versus what might make my job easier tomorrow. If I can build a relationship today, the business outcomes will just fall into place with a lot less effort. So I think that's really important. But I had another point in the train of thought has escaped me now, but we'll come back to it later.
We'll come back. Yeah. Pick it up. All right.
Well,
so
I think part of it also the way that
ahead.
I've been thinking about data, I think the scary part of it is the fact that the man has it. So like Oberlin having my data is not a big deal to me. It's that it's being used so poorly that I get really worried about it. And if again, I'll go back to the conversation I had earlier today with somebody that she and I wanted to talk about something in particular, and having a little bit more backstory about each of us would have been really valuable. The only way that we would have had that would be talking to each other before or asking Oberlin for each other's information. And neither of us have given information to Oberlin because we know that it's not going to be used in that manner right now. Right. So part of it is like a human disconnect from the humanness of it, that it's being used to market more broadly rather than more personally. And I mean, I'd say the same thing, being wary of most social media channels that I use. I only put in so much because I don't want more right now, because it's an attempt to reach me as a human that's not a human trying to reach me.
Right. Meg, did you, I wasn't sure if you...
No, I didn't have anything.
Okay.
Nope.
Let's flip this on its head and talk about this not from the perspective of higher education professionals, but from the perspective of alumni and former students. And what would we love our schools to be able to talk to us about when they communicate with us that they don't do right now? What would they be able to do with a better life cycle model?
Well, the conversation I had this afternoon, I'm going to keep on going back to this because it has impacted me a lot, and I'm so glad it happened 2 hours before this show. It's just perfect timing. Is the idea of we're not doing this alone. So in the formative years of being in college, things are crazy. A lot of things happen to you. You feel like you're the only one this is happening to. In fact, it's not just happening to you. And guess what? Most people get through it and they're going to be totally fine. And that they go off into the world and don't necessarily talk to it with each other. I think there's an automatic affinity because we all had some related experience because we went to the school with the same name that could be really valuable for us to find a compatriot in whatever we're thinking about. I mean, none of us went to school together, but we had this nice interface called Twitter to help us out. But substitute Twitter for our college, and we have a much better idea of there are random people out there that have similar things to us that we care about. It comes back to relationships. Right now, what I want most is the ability to help poor, unassuming students that are having the same struggles I had when I was a student, and also similar young alums that are having the same struggles as me. I'm having an existential crisis because I'm 25. I want to talk to other people. I don't even care if we had the same major. I just I know we're going to think kind of the same because we went to the same school. I don't know.
And I can tell you that working in alumni, that when I did work in alumni, we had overwhelming support from the alumni along those lines. People who would not necessarily give money today would totally give advice or help or empathize or just relate to people, just to make their process easier and kind of let them know that it was going to be okay, and look, hey, I'm a living, breathing example of how you can get through it and not just survive, but actually succeed and do well. So I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, and really being able, like you were saying, there's so much capital there to be leveraged in terms of alumni's willingness to do that. And it's almost one of those where we're not set up really well to facilitate that connection. There's not a real good vision of what those relationships look like. The tools aren't often put in place well to make it easy. And if you give someone the illusion of being engaged and then don't facilitate it well, it's worse than not even having them engaged in the first place. You just created a bad relationship instead of the lack of relationship where you're trying to put a good one. And so I think, there's tools that I think we're getting to how we can really leverage them in the social space, digital space, in terms of connecting these people. I think there's a long way to go, but really providing those relationships and that utility and that benefit to our constituents when, at a point when we don't need something in return from them is really important. Yeah, one of the other things that struck me is just, at me as an alumni, what do I want from this situation? Talk to me like you know me. If I have to fill out one more form for my alma mater where I give them the same information that I've given them a dozen times that was my information when I'm a student, I'm like, you know this. You know me. Why do I need to tell you this stuff? It's there. And so reducing those points where we make it really obvious that we aren't talking to each other about you, or we don't know you as an organization, I think is going to be really important.
Definitely. Okay, good stuff. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what it would be like to work in two different places at once. What do you think it would be like to work for admissions and alumni? What would that look like in a week? What's your schedule look like? Who are you talking to? What types of collaboration opportunities are going to come up? And pick any two areas of campus. But start with admission and alumni. I think is probably the most obvious place because I think it's the furthest distance, right? So you've got a lot of times decades in between when someone started their journey in a relationship with the college and where they might be at now, and you also have this interesting cyclical nature between the two where you become an alumnus and then help out enrollment, like you said, with helping out students who might be wondering about a particular major or something like that. So what kind of things? Where are the convergence points? What would you be able to add value to as an employee working in both those areas that two employees working independent in those areas can't provide?
So I think one of the things that we're learning in the last couple of years is a transition between prospective students who are really focusing more on outcomes and is this school going to be where I can get a job and things like that. And so I'll use that as an example. I think somebody in the lifetime engagement type of position could talk with parents and talk with prospective students about, let's say, outcomes or whatever they're worried about in terms of coming to college. Like what are they focusing on? What are their deciding factors? And then figuring out a way on the alumni side to make sure that our alumni are also we're finding ways for alumni to engage in those ways that we are providing those opportunities for our students. I know that we've made a significant step forward in terms of providing internships and different opportunities here on campus because we know that that's what incoming students are looking for. And I think we've been with the curve in terms of adapting to that, but I think having somebody going in between constantly and working with both offices like in a cohesive way, that those things would happen so much more quickly, and we'd really know how to respond to what our prospective students and their parents and family members really need in terms of how we can use our alumni to kind of help that out.
Awesome ideas.
Yeah, I actually am thinking about it most specifically from the parent perspective because it's the most immediate to me. My dad went to Oberlin, I went here, my brother currently goes here, and I think that relationship of a parent going to the same school that you do is a very interesting one when it comes to looking at schools, because there can either be a huge bias as to this is where you're going to go or a complete hands-off relationship. Right. And I think just knowing what that looks like and knowing that not everyone's going to have the same experience. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of, I'm not going to generalize hugely, but a number of alums at some point end up being parents. And if they end up being parents, they'll have the conversation about college at some point. Huge gross generalization, obviously. But knowing that, even if their child doesn't go to the same university as them, having the knowledge of how that relationship works means that they can ask better questions on behalf of their child anywhere they choose to go, not just their school. And so I think it helps getting us more informed on the big picture than small space.
Yeah. And if an alum goes on to be a parent, they're not just interacting with their child. Their child is part of a high school class of hundreds or thousands of people. They're going to sports banquets with other parents. They're going to any number of other things. Their kids are talking to their friends. That social network, little s social network, the broader concept that happens out there is so incredibly powerful, and being able to see that and be able to leverage that for any stage in our life cycle, I think is going to be really important. Meg, I loved what you were saying about the fact that each stage in the life cycle has proof points that we should integrate to the messaging for other stages. Parents right now care a lot about outcomes. Our alumni know a lot about outcomes. We should probably be talking to each other really quickly, not just at the quarterly all-campus marketing meeting.
Right.
We should go back and forth today to respond to those messages. The other thing I think is really, if you were only focused on doing the traditional, functional roles, the doer roles, if you will, in each of the different departments, you drive yourself crazy. But if you work on putting the processes and the systems in place, those are the type of things that kind of transcend any of these stages. And so if you are that person that's working in two places at the same time, you can still do one job that applies to both of those things and ties them both together, which I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. I think roles like this are happening now. I know roles like this are happening now. Last time I presented on lifetime engagement management at SUNY over the summer, I had someone come up to me afterward and said, "You're not going to believe this, but this is my first day on the job as a 50-50 employee between these two divisions." And I was like, "You got to be kidding me. That's, what are the odds?" But she said, "Yeah, this is really interesting to talk about because, I'm a real living example of someone who's doing this, and not even just that she was doing that, but that the institution recognized the need for it enough to create a full-time position, and it wasn't just, kind of wedged into someone else's job." And I think that that's one big part of this, is that job expectations are unrealistic if your job is to be this and this full-time position, which I think is where we are now, right? People who see the connections that need to take place, people who go above and beyond and really want to build the relationships, but have a 40-hour plus job per week to do already, and are doing this as an added value because they're passionate about it. What we really need is people who have very distinct job roles who can have time to focus on the connection point. So yeah, it's happening. It really is happening. And Rob Zinkin is also a good example of somebody who's working from a more of a high-level approach. So he's a vice chancellor for external communications, and he does at Indiana University, and he essentially heads up all of the divisions that fall within that, and that includes enrollment and student affairs and alumni communications. So they take the communications aspect of each of those areas, pull them out, and put them under the same umbrella, which I think is pretty interesting. So it's happening. It's just the examples are still few and far between for the most part, but it's encouraging to see that type of thing.
It's really encouraging, and I just the small part of me that's a cynic has a caution flag, because I think if you throw someone at what is truly a 50-50 position, you run the risk of setting that person up for failure if they're reporting to two very different accountability structures. If it's not part of the organization above that person, what happens if one department wants 60% of that time? What happens if there's not congruence between how different departments do things? I think it's an awesome first step, but you have to really empower the employee in that role to own it, and speak at least enough of a common language above them to let that happen.
I think it's a great point, and I think that, not that we can dictate what the structure should look like and act like we know what it would, what would be successful, but I think dual reports who have naturally divergent priorities is going to be a tough situation for anybody to be in. So I almost think that maybe this is this is someone who works for someone who is neither of those people, but contributes to both areas, equally or as close to equally as they can, and it's looked more along the lines of additional help and perspective for each of those halves, as opposed to somebody who's only available half the week. I mean, which they could be doing the exact same job, but that's that's how the organizational structure could potentially affect the perception of it. So, okay, cool.
During the summer, I actually tried to think very broadly about what my current position at Oberlin looks like, and looked about 10 years in the future, not just here, but in terms of social media in particular, because that's my area of expertise, that if this is something that has become so integral to what we do all over the place, that there actually could possibly be the social communications office that's not that specifically deals with these elements of it, and it could be a part of a number of different things. But what I was imagining was there are 6 or 8 or 10 people who work in that office, but are the specific person that liaises with admissions or alumni affairs or development or student life or whatever. And half time actually means you spend a couple hours a day actively doing your role in that space, and the other half of the day doing that role with the other people doing what you're doing on campus. That's way too far in the future right now, because this doesn't. People are lucky if they have a half-time person doing social media, but I was just thinking really big, and that's what happened.
But
So,
isn't that the great thing, though, that type of collaboration and centralization brings? If I'm the underwater basket weaving department, I can't get social media resources, but if I have that central place where I can get just a fraction of someone's time, that's all I need. And if that's available to me, then I get results that are exponentially better than the nothing I had before. And I get the expertise. Even if I got a quarter-time person in my department, are they really knowledgeable about social media? So I think having those central resources makes everyone more efficient. Not to get into the classic centralization, decentralization debate that plagues us all the time, but there you have it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, you kind of can go on either side of the fence there with certain topics, but I think lifetime engagement management, by its very nature, is a centralized approach. I don't think you can, I think you can do it, you can have it decentralized to a degree, as in disseminating information to people, but I think you still need a hub, right? Whether that's an individual or that's a department of individuals, you still need somebody who is connected to all the various spokes of the wheel, and so I think it is a centralized model to a certain extent, and there's no easy answers with this, and if it was really easy, it would have happened already, right? This is not something that necessarily is slipping the minds of all of the higher leadership in higher education. I think there's some people who are thinking about this. I think that they're trying to figure out how to structure things differently, but big institutions move slowly, and this type of radical organizational structural change is going to be difficult for many different reasons, and part of the reason why it hasn't happened, I think, is because there hasn't been enough of a disincentive to institutions to change, or there hasn't been enough incentive to change or disincentive to not. And I think, I might be wrong about this, but I think that's changing. There's more of a focus on return on investment. There's way more of a focus on outcomes. Programs need to justify why they exist. That opens up an entire other can of worms about what academic freedom is, and what the need to learn for learning's sake and not be tied to a budget or profitability. God forbid you say profitability on campus, but the reality of the marketplace and of where education's headed with online learning and with all kinds of other factors is that more than ever, you need to be able to justify why it is that you are there and why you are there, why you are so valuable to people. And I think the relationship is something that you can never replicate virtually. No online learning environment's ever going to be able to replace the type of relationship you build with an institution physically. And I think that this type of relationship first, customer first mentality really ultimately ends up benefiting all aspects of the university, including the academic aspects. So I think it's a lot of really big picture stuff. I think it's not easy, but I have to say that I'm really encouraged by the fact that there are lots of other people. Mayan, to your point, like, am I the only one out there who's like having this struggle and am having these questions? And the answer is no, obviously, at least the four of us have the same ideas, right? There are a lot of people out there, and you know, for anyone who's watching, and for the three of you, I would say, you know, just keep on banging the drum about this and keep on looking for opportunities to bring this to people's attention as a way of doing things that's different than what we're doing now, and that can ultimately be really beneficial for everybody. So here's to, you know, 10 years in the future, if we all are sitting around, you know, having a couple drinks, looking back on this Higher Ed Live episode, which I'm sure is exactly what we're going to be doing. We'll be able to laugh about how crazy our predictions were and how off base we were. But, you know, it's been really a pleasure talking with all of you about what the future holds and what it could look like, and you know, keep on doing good work and getting the word out. Thanks very much.
That'll be when you fly us all out to Hawaii for the unconference that we're going to start, right? That's
Right.
when we'll sit around.
I have a house. You guys can, like, yeah, we'll touch
You have a
base.
house in Hawaii?
My parents live there.
Perfect.
Oh, perfect.
Done.
Well, the nice thing about an unconference is because it's not location specific, it could be location anywhere. So yeah, Hawaii is a good place.
Hawaii's totally fine. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate your time and input. It was really great conversation.
Thank you all.
All right, and thanks all of you for watching. And join us next Thursday night on Higher Ed Live as Susan Evans, my colleague from mStoner, brings you a roundtable ahead of the American Marketing Association conference. That will be awesome. Susan is awesome. And we are tweeting a link out to that right now. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great evening.